He stood there for the first time, his eyes fixed on the Kaaba as he watched the endless movement around it, people walking in circles step after step without stopping and without breaking, as if they were part of something much bigger than themselves, and in that moment a question quietly formed inside him, one he had never truly asked before: why are they circling it, why this motion, why this direction? Why again and again around a single point? Because he had seen it before in videos and pictures that passed quickly on a screen, but standing there was different. Now it was real, and now he could feel it, the rhythm of footsteps, the quiet intensity, and the way thousands of people moved together without speaking, without needing instructions, as if they all understood something he didn't. He took a slow step forward and joined the flow, his movement hesitant at first and slightly unsure, because his body followed what everyone else was doing while his heart was still searching for meaning, still trying to understand why this act existed and why this circle mattered. And as he walked, the ground beneath his feet felt steady while his thoughts moved, questioning, observing, trying to grasp something deeper than what his eyes could see. Around him faces were different, languages were different, and lives were different, yet the movement was the same, one direction, one center and one purpose, and that alone made something inside him pause, because in a world where everything is divided, this felt unified in a way he had never experienced before. He continued walking and slowly began to match the rhythm, step by step, and as he moved, something subtle began to shift inside him, not a full answer and not yet understanding, but a feeling, a quiet sense that this was not just walking, not just movement and not just tradition, because there was intention here and there was meaning here. He looked again at the Kaaba, simple in its appearance yet carrying a weight he couldn't fully explain, and the more he looked the more the question returned, stronger now and deeper: why this center, why this direction, and why do we circle it instead of walking away from it? He lowered his gaze slightly and his steps became more natural, more aligned with the flow around him, and as his body adjusted, his mind began to quiet just enough for him to notice something he had not seen before, that the movement itself was not random, it was not chaotic, it was ordered, consistent and intentional, with everyone moving around a single point without colliding, without breaking and without losing direction. And in that pattern something began to make sense, not as a full answer but as a realization forming slowly inside him. Everything has a center, and that thought did not feel random, it felt connected to what he was witnessing, because the earth has a center, the planets move around a center, and the stars follow paths around something unseen, and now he was moving around a center too, not randomly and not without reason, but as part of something larger than himself. His steps slowed slightly, not enough to stop but enough to feel each movement more clearly, and as he did, another realization rose inside him, one that made his chest feel heavier in a way that carried awareness. What is my center? And that question stayed with him as he walked, repeating quietly in his mind, because if everything in existence moves around something, then what was he moving around in his own life, his thoughts, his desires and his time? What stood at the center of it all? He swallowed slowly and lowered his gaze again, because this was no longer just about the Kaaba, this was about him, about his life and about his direction, and as he continued walking, each step felt different, no longer just following the crowd but reflecting something inside him that was beginning to shift. The movement continued around him, steady and endless, and for the first time he did not feel outside of it, he felt part of it, connected to it, as if each step was pulling him closer, not just physically but internally, closer to something he had not fully realized before. And as he moved with the flow, one thought settled quietly but deeply within him: this circle was not just around the Kaaba, it was pointing to something much greater, something he had not yet fully understood but was slowly beginning to feel. As he continued moving with the crowd, something inside him refused to stay silent, because the question that had begun forming did not leave him. Instead it grew stronger with every step, and the more he walked around the Kaaba, the more he felt that this movement was not just something his body was doing, it was something his heart was being pulled into, something deeper than habit and far beyond tradition, because the rhythm around him was constant, thousands of footsteps moving together in perfect flow, yet no one spoke and no one explained, and still everyone understood, as if this act did not need words because it was something meant to be felt before it could ever be understood. He kept walking, his pace now steady and his steps aligned with those around him, but his thoughts were no longer scattered, they were focused on one thing, the center, because everything he saw pointed back to it, every movement, every direction, every step, all of it circled back to that single point, and the more he thought about it, the clearer something became. This was not about the Kaaba itself, it was about what it represented, because a structure does not hold this kind of power on its own, something greater gives it meaning, something beyond what the eyes can see. He lifted his gaze again and looked more carefully, not just seeing a building but sensing what it stood for, and in that moment something inside him shifted, because he realized that all his life he had been moving around many different centers, his desires pulling him one way, his fears pulling him another, his ambitions demanding his time, his distractions filling his attention. And because of that his life had never truly felt aligned, it had always been in motion but never at peace. Here, everything was different, everything moved around one center, one focus, one purpose, and in that unity there was something powerful, something his heart recognized even if his mind was still trying to fully understand it, because for the first time he was not being pulled in different directions, he was moving in one direction with clarity, with purpose, with intention. He took a slow breath, his chest rising and falling as his awareness deepened, because now every step felt meaningful, not just part of a crowd but part of something that was reshaping how he saw his own life, as if each step was asking him something without words. What are you centered on? What controls your direction? What defines your movement? And that question settled heavily inside him because he knew the answer was not simple. He had spent years chasing things that felt important in the moment, things that gave temporary satisfaction but never lasting peace, and now, walking in this circle, he began to see the difference between movement and purpose, because a person can move endlessly and still feel lost, but when there is a true center, every step begins to carry meaning. He lowered his gaze slightly, his thoughts no longer scattered but focused, because this was no longer observation, it was reflection, and the more he reflected, the more he understood that Tawaf was not just about walking around something, it was about aligning yourself with something greater than yourself, aligning your heart with its true center, aligning your intentions with something that does not change, aligning your life with something that gives direction beyond temporary desires. As he continued walking, he felt a quiet shift inside him, not sudden and not overwhelming but steady and real, as if something that had been scattered within him was slowly being pulled together, because for the first time he was not trying to control everything, he was allowing himself to follow something greater, something constant, something that did not depend on his emotions or his circumstances. The movement around him remained the same, but his experience of it changed because now he was not just physically circling the Kaaba, he was beginning to understand what it meant to make Allah the center of his life, and that realization carried a weight that he could feel in his chest. He swallowed slowly because this was no longer just a thought, it was a truth he could not ignore, because if everything in existence moves around a center, then a life without a true center will always feel unstable, always feel incomplete, always feel like something is missing. He lifted his gaze once more, his eyes resting on the Kaaba, and this time he did not see it as a structure, he saw it as a reminder that everything returns to one point, everything revolves around one truth, and that truth does not change no matter how much the world around it does. His steps continued, steady and consistent, and with every movement he felt a sense of clarity growing inside him, because for the first time he understood that this act was not about the distance he walked, but about the direction of his heart, not about the physical circle, but about the internal alignment that came with it. The noise of the world he had left behind felt distant now, his distractions, his worries, his endless thoughts that once filled his mind, all of it seemed less important in this moment, because here, everything was simplified, everything was reduced to one focus, one center, one purpose, and that simplicity brought a kind of peace he had not felt before. He realized then that the reason people circle the Kaaba is not because the structure itself needs it, but because the human heart needs a center, and without it, it becomes lost, pulled in different directions, never fully settled, never fully at peace. And as that realization settled inside him, something changed, not outside but within him, because now he was not just walking around the Kaaba, he was learning how to center his life, how to let go of what distracted him, how to return to what truly mattered, and that understanding did not come as a loud realization, it came quietly but with a depth that stayed. He continued walking, his breathing calm, his steps steady, and for the first time he felt that this movement was not repetitive, it was transformative, because with every circle he was not just moving forward physically, he was moving closer to clarity, closer to purpose, closer to understanding something he had never fully seen before. And in that moment, one thought settled deeply within him, this was not just about circling a building, this was about learning what it means to revolve around Allah, and that was something he had only just begun to understand. As he continued walking, the movement no longer felt like something external, it began to feel internal, as if each step was not just carrying his body forward but slowly reshaping something inside him, because the more he circled the Kaaba, the more he understood that this act was not about reaching a destination, it was about returning to a center he had drifted away from without even realizing it, and that realization stayed with him as his steps remained steady, as his breathing settled into the rhythm of the crowd, and as his thoughts became quieter than they had been in a long time. He began to notice something he had missed before, that everyone around him was different in every visible way, different languages, different backgrounds, different lives, yet in this moment none of those differences mattered, because they were all moving the same way, around the same center, with the same purpose, and that unity carried a meaning that went beyond words, because it showed him something simple but powerful, that when the center is correct, everything else falls into place. His gaze softened as he looked around, not with curiosity anymore but with understanding, because now he was not trying to figure out what was happening, he was beginning to feel why it mattered. And that shift changed everything, because what once felt like a question was now becoming an answer, not fully formed yet, but clear enough to guide him. He realized then that Tawaf was not just a ritual, it was a reminder repeated with every step, a reminder that no matter how far a person drifts, there is always a way back to the center, always a way to realign, always a way to return. That thought settled deeply in him, because he knew how far he had drifted at times, how often he had allowed distractions to become priorities, how easily he had let temporary things take the place of what truly mattered, and now, walking in this circle, he could see that clearly without needing anyone to explain it to him. He lowered his gaze slightly, his steps still steady, because this was no longer about observing others, it was about confronting himself, about asking what had been at the center of his life before this moment, and whether it had truly been worth it. The answer did not come in words, it came as a feeling, a quiet understanding that what he had been chasing had never given him what he was truly looking for, and that realization did not feel heavy, it felt freeing, because it meant he could choose differently now. He took a slow breath, his chest rising and falling with a calm he had not expected to find, because in a place filled with so many people, he felt a kind of stillness he had never felt alone, and that stillness was not empty, it was centered, it was focused, it was grounded in something that did not change. As he continued walking, he began to see that Tawaf was not only about circling the Kaaba, it was about breaking away from everything else that had been pulling him in different directions, because in this movement there was no room for distraction, no space for scattered thoughts, only one direction, one focus, one center, and that simplicity revealed something he had missed in his everyday life. That complexity often comes from having too many centers, from trying to revolve around too many things at once. His steps remained consistent, and with every circle he felt something becoming clearer, that his life did not need more movement, it needed more alignment, it needed a center that did not change when circumstances changed, a center that did not shift when emotions shifted, a center that remained constant no matter what happened around it. He lifted his gaze again, looking at the Kaaba, and this time there was no confusion in his eyes, only recognition, because he understood now that this was not about the structure itself, it was about what it pointed to, about what it represented, about the one who was meant to be at the center of everything. That understanding settled into his heart in a way that felt firm, not temporary, not uncertain, but real, because it connected everything he had been feeling into one clear truth. He continued walking, his movements steady, his thoughts calm, and for the first time he felt that he was not just following the motion, he was part of its meaning, part of what it represented, part of something that had existed long before him and would continue long after him. And as that realization deepened, one final thought settled clearly inside him, that Tawaf was not something limited to this place, it was something he was meant to carry beyond it, because the real question was not why we circle the Kaaba here, but whether our hearts continue to circle the right center when we leave, and that was something he now understood in a way he never had before.